All right, let's dive in. We're taking a look at the world as it stands, late 2024. We've got some really interesting pieces from Foreign Affairs and The Economist to dig into, really get a feel for what the next 5 years might hold, and most importantly, how all of this could impact you.
Yeah, feels like you can't turn around without bumping into some kind of crisis these days. We've got
Hmm.
all these geopolitical tensions simmering. The global economy is doing its own, well, unpredictable dance. And on top of that, technology is changing everything at warp speed.
Absolutely. Okay, let's start with the big one that's been impossible to ignore,
Mm.
the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The Economist paints a pretty grim picture. They talk about the fall of Volodar. After 2 years of holding out, a drone attack on a hospital in Sumy, and then the constant shelling of Kherson. Just a brutal reminder of the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah. And no signs of letting up anytime soon. Foreign Affairs goes deep on this really thorny question. Should Ukraine be allowed to hit targets inside Russia? I mean, on one hand, you could argue it's a way to deter further aggression, right? But then you also run the risk of a major escalation, potentially even dragging NATO into the mix.
Yeah, feels like one wrong step could send things totally off the rails. And speaking of powder kegs, The Economist also breaks down the recent clash between Israel and, well, the Iran-Hezbollah alliance. You had Iran launching missiles. Israel retaliated with a targeted campaign that took out Hezbollah's leader.
What's interesting is Saudi Arabia's response. The crown prince came out and said they wouldn't recognize Israel until there's a Palestinian state. Kind of signals that even major players in the region are feeling uneasy about the situation.
It really makes you think, what does all of this mean for the future? Especially when you see those images coming out of Gaza, the devastation, and then you hear about young Palestinians becoming more and more radicalized. It's a stark reminder that this isn't some abstract political game. There are real people caught in the crossfire.
It's a reminder that we need to look beyond the headlines. Start thinking about long-term solutions that address the root causes, not just the symptoms. Speaking of complex situations, what about China?
The economic powerhouse. The Economist points out they're grappling with this economic slowdown. But then, on the other hand, their stock market's rallying, apparently fueled by government intervention. Feels like they're walking a pretty delicate tightrope.
Foreign Affairs adds some interesting context here. They argue that staying in power for as long as the Chinese Communist Party has, well, it comes with its own set of challenges. And while they're juggling those internal pressures, they're also making some pretty bold moves on the global stage.
Like their Anaconda strategy aimed at Taiwan. The Economist details how China's using this combination of economic pressure, diplomacy, and military might to squeeze Taiwan. They even just conducted an ICBM test, not exactly a subtle message.
And to really grasp the significance of that, you got to look back a bit. The last time China did an ICBM test like this, Xi Jinping was just 27 years old, and their economy was a fraction of what it is today. Shows you how fast they've grown in terms of both economic and military power.
A little unnerving, especially when Foreign Affairs raises these concerns about their growing nuclear ambitions. Some experts even think they might overtake the U.S. in nuclear capabilities at some point. It's like this high-stakes chess match playing out on the world stage, and the stakes just got even higher.
And while they're flexing their muscles globally, they're also tighten control over information and dissent back home. Makes you wonder about the implications for tech development, especially with AI. The Economist actually contrasts the challenges of developing AI in India with all of its linguistic diversity compared to the more controlled environments in China and the US.
Makes you think about how different cultures and political systems are going to shape the future of tech. Speaking of different systems, Foreign Affairs has this deep dive into the trend of, well, democratic backsliding that seems to be happening everywhere. They look at countries like Bangladesh, Hungary, Poland, showing how different paths can lead to authoritarianism.
But it's not a one-way street. The article also talks about the possibility of reversing this trend, bringing democratic values back to life, even in places where they seem to be fading. Offers a glimmer of hope in what's otherwise a pretty concerning trend.
A good reminder that change is possible, even in the face of these big challenges. We can't ignore the fact that the U.S. isn't immune to this either. Foreign Affairs analyzes the 2024 election and the growing divide between Democrats and Republicans. They argue that this polarization is actually feeding into the global trend of democratic backsliding.
And it's not just theoretical. The Economist tells this chilling story about the attempted assassination of Trump. They focus on the would-be assassin, this guy who was driven to violence by political disillusionment and all these conspiracy theories. A pretty stark reminder of how dangerous this polarization can get.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. Okay, let's zoom out a little and talk about the global economy. The Economist starts with this fact that caught my eye. Canada's economy is falling behind the U.S. Seems surprising, but it actually ties into this bigger trend that foreign affairs explores, the end of the global catch-up era.
For decades, we saw these developing countries catching up fast to the developed economies. But Foreign Affairs argues that this is coming to an end, leading to a widening gap between the rich and poor countries. They even quote Bill Gates. He's saying traditional aid is becoming less effective, and he's emphasizing the need for homegrown reforms in developing countries.
Like, we need a whole new playbook for global development. And just to add another layer of complexity, The Economist reveals that the World Bank has found this massive surge in hidden debt worldwide, a global financial puzzle with some incredibly high stakes.
And amidst all this economic uncertainty, some surprising things are happening. The Economist highlights how China, despite being communist, is actually embracing privatization, shows you how much the global economic landscape is shifting.
A lot to take in, for sure. But before we get totally overwhelmed, let's shift gears and focus on the force that's shaping everything. Technology. The Economist explores the potential of AI, how it's already changing our lives in profound ways.
Which brings up this huge question, right? How do we harness the power of technology for good while minimizing the risks? A question that will define our future, no doubt. And speaking of cultural shifts, remember the whole wokeness trend from a couple years back?
Yeah, it was everywhere.
Well, The Economist presents some data suggesting it might have peaked in 2021-22 and is actually on the decline now. Just goes to show how even these really entrenched cultural trends can shift and evolve. And with AI developing so fast, who knows how it will impact those trends in the future?
Mind-boggling to think about. And on that note, The Economist brings up another potential disruptor, the impact of generative AI on the job market. They suggest it could lead to more offshoring, especially for software engineers, and a shift in the skills that are most in demand.
It's not just about jobs disappearing, though. AI could also improve our lives in ways we might not expect. For instance, did you know researchers are using AI to revolutionize mental health care? They're even using vocal cues to diagnose conditions.
Wow, that's incredible. It seems like AI has the potential to be both a disruptor and a powerful tool for good. It's a lot to process, and honestly, we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, just scratching the surface, expert speaker. The potential of AI is vast, and it's already making its way into areas we might not even realize, like mental health care. AI could make those services more accessible and affordable, especially in parts of the world where mental health professionals are scarce.
It's amazing to think about. So we've talked about wars, shaky economies, the rise of AI, cultural shifts. Phew, it's a lot. How does this all connect to our everyday lives? That's what I'm really curious about.
That's the question, right? Think about the trends we've been discussing. Cost of living, the job market, even the information we come across online. They're all being shaped by these big global forces.
So what does it all mean for us? What can we actually do about it?
Million-dollar question. No easy answers, but I think awareness is a good starting point. By understanding these trends, we can make more informed decisions about our careers, our finances, how we engage with the world. It's about reclaiming some control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
Like having a roadmap to navigate this complex landscape. Speaking of complex, we haven't even touched on the environment yet. It's a big piece of the puzzle that's intertwined with everything we've been discussing.
Absolutely. Climate change is the ultimate global challenge. It's a threat multiplier, amplifying things like geopolitical tensions over resources or economic disruptions caused by extreme weather.
The Economist had this fascinating piece on measuring the effectiveness of climate policies. Turns out it's more complicated than you'd think. We need better data, better analysis to figure out what actually works.
What's intriguing is they suggest using AI to help with this. Imagine AI models sifting through mountains of data, pinpointing the most effective climate solutions. That could be a game changer.
It's amazing how AI keeps popping up in these discussions. It seems like it could solve some of our biggest problems, but also create new ones.
That duality is at the heart of the AI debate. It's a powerful tool, but like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
So we've got global conflicts, economic instability, climate change, and the rise of AI. It feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But at least we're not alone in facing these challenges. They're global issues that require global solutions, right?
Exactly. And that's where institutions like the United Nations come in. Foreign Affairs has this thought-provoking essay on the state of the UN. Can it be reformed to effectively address the challenges of the 21st century? It's a question a lot of people are asking.
It sounds like the UN is facing a bit of an identity crisis, trying to figure out its role in a world that's vastly different from the one it was created for.
The authors of the Foreign Affairs piece advocate for a return to the UN's core principles promoting peace, security, and international cooperation. They believe that by focusing on these fundamental goals, the UN can regain its relevance and effectiveness.
It makes sense. But it's not just about international organizations, is it? It's about individuals like us getting involved, staying informed, and making our voices heard.
Absolutely. Global citizenship is more important than ever. We can't just think about our own little corner of the world. We need to engage with global issues in a meaningful way.
So we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff. But before we wrap things up, I want to end on a more positive note. Despite all the challenges we face, there's still reason for hope, right?
Absolutely. Human ingenuity, innovation, and resilience have always found a way.
I love that. It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We've overcome incredible obstacles throughout history, and I believe we can do it again.
And don't forget the power of human connection and collaboration. We've seen time and again how people can come together to overcome adversity and build a better future. I believe we can tap into that collective power once again.
It's inspiring to think about all the positive things happening around the world, even amidst all the chaos. From breakthroughs in technology and medicine to the growing movement for social and environmental justice, there's so much to be hopeful for.
It's true. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the collective will to create a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. It won't be easy, but it's definitely possible.
Okay, so we've explored some complex and challenging topics today. We've talked about wars and economic uncertainty, the power of AI, and the urgent need to address climate change. But we've also highlighted the potential for positive change, the importance of global citizenship, and the power of human connection.
I think a key takeaway from our deep dive today is that the world is complex, the challenges are real, but there's also immense potential for positive change. It all starts with understanding these challenges and engaging with them in a meaningful way.
I think that's a perfect place to end this part of our conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've got a lot more to unpack. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned and consider how we can turn this knowledge into action. Back again for the final stretch of our deep dive. I hope sifting through all these global issues has left you feeling more informed than overwhelmed.
That's what we're aiming for. Knowledge is power, right? But only if we actually use it. So let's talk about making a difference in this world that seems to be, well, constantly changing.
Okay, so where do we even start? It's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're looking at these huge global challenges.
You can start local. We talked about all these trends, right? Democratic backsliding, economic inequality, climate change. Are there any organizations in your community that are tackling these issues? Volunteering your time or donating to a cause you care about, those actions can have ripple effects way beyond your neighborhood.
It's a good point. We don't have to solve everything all at once. Small actions can add up. Speaking of small actions, The Economist had this surprisingly interesting article about bike theft.
Sounds pretty mundane, right?
Mm.
But it actually illustrates how local solutions can address these global trends. They talked about this police force in the UK that cracked down on bike theft, not just by catching the thieves, but by creating a whole system for marking bikes and tracking them online. Simple idea, but a big impact.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that innovation can happen anywhere, at any level. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones closest to home.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your own choices. Think about how you spend your money, what you buy, where you invest, even how you vote. These everyday decisions contribute to building a more sustainable and equitable world.
So it's not just about making these grand gestures, it's about being mindful in our daily lives.
Exactly. And staying informed is key. Keep reading articles like the ones we've been talking about today, engage in these kinds of conversations, and don't be afraid to question your own assumptions.
The world is changing so fast, we all need to be constantly learning just to keep up. And hey, who knows, maybe you'll even discover some new passion or a new way to make a difference along the way.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. The world is complex, the challenges are real, but there's also huge potential for positive change. And it all starts with each of us.
That wraps up our deep dive into global affairs. We hope this whirlwind tour of current events and future trends have given you some food for thought. And most importantly, we hope it's left you feeling empowered to make a difference. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making the world a better place.